Now, just as a way of introducing this PowerPoint, I use this in South Florida as sort of like mind candy. I just want to get somebody excited about doing occultations, and I want somebody to get excited about doing it for the very first time. And so I encourage people to go out and do it visually. If they're doing it visually, there are very, very few events that are suitable for that. You have to have a really bright star and probably long duration, and the event has to be high ranked, and you want to be as close to the center line as possible. And because they certainly don't get any enthusiasm out of going out and being eaten alive by mosquitoes and then seeing no event. So, and so I try not to do that by encouraging them to do something else. So next slide, please. And so I tell people to go through a list of what do you have that would allow you to do an occultation. And I kind of get their mind excited about events that IOTA has done. This is the asteroid Brixia deployment. And I have a short clip that I often show in conjunction with this, which is the star disappearing and reappearing that I shot with my station. And I bring my little 70 millimeter ocular station in with the CCD video camera and let them know that it's very small, it's very light, it's very portable, and compared to what they might spend for a normal astronomy setup, it's really very inexpensive. And so that they start thinking about that in terms of how do I do real science with the astronomy equipment that I have. Next slide, please. And then I walk them through the model of just how many stars can you see. And in West Palm Beach, on a good night, I can see MiG 2 stars. If I step out my front porch and look due north towards the Cape, and I can actually, I used to be able to watch launches from there. On a very good night, I can see Polaris due north of my front door. And so when I step out to see if I want to go open the dome on the observatory, that's what I look for. But I walk people through this particular chart to show them that every time you gain a magnitude of depth of seeing, that the number of stars that you see go up by a factor of about 3. There's a major gain. So if I'm looking out there and I see the possibility of 283 stars because I'm seeing down to MiG 3, if I could get to MiG 4, I would be close to 900 stars. Or if I get to, and of course this is not how many stars are in the sky at any one time in my hemisphere. These are all the stars available globally. And that if I get down to MiG 6, I'm above 8,000 stars. Next slide, please. So they start thinking about that in terms of how deep can I see and how many events would be available to me. By the time you get down to MiG 10, you're up to 626,000 stars, a lot of events. Well, if you can push it to MiG 11 or MiG 12, at MiG 12 you've got over 5 million stars available to be seen. And that gives you a lot more events to attempt in terms of what's available. And a Occult Watcher can typically get you into the 12th magnitude range. And I think I've now started to see some 13th magnitude events from, what is that, the low MiG North American feed? Or occasional ones that get sent over. So the reason we walk through this kind of a table is just to get them to thinking about how much more they would be able to see if they were able to see deeper with the proper equipment. Next slide, please. And I talk a little bit about signal to noise ratio and the problem of oversaturating anything that you might see. I don't think this is going to show, but this is one of our standard GIFs that shows an asteroid moving in front of the star so they can see what's actually happening out there in the main belt. And of course you don't see the asteroid. What you see is the star disappear and then reappear. And in real time as a PowerPoint, this runs. They are able to see this without any problem at all. Next slide, please. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, David. And so then I talk about a little bit about the history of occultations and the approach that IOTA has developed in terms of GPS timing and some of the things that you're able to do in terms of identifying close doubles and other pieces of scientific information. And the idea, again, is just to get them excited about the possibility of making contributions to science. I'm not trying to teach them how to do any of this stuff. Frankly, I couldn't teach anybody how to do any of this stuff. But I can say the words and read the words off of the page. Next slide, please. We've all seen this one before, but I point out that the visual observer in position A or the visual observer in position E can set that north and south limit. You don't have to be out there with GPS and daytime stamping and video and you don't have to be at the high end of what members of IOTA are doing to make significant contributions. Any chord is a good chord, whether it's recorded as a hit or a miss. It can be a confirming hit or it can be a limit-setting miss. Can still be a good piece of data to report, and I tell them every one of those pieces of information are critically important. And if you were the guy out there that did an isolated event and needed somebody to confirm your event and couldn't find that guy or couldn't find that data set or that report wasn't submitted, then you would appreciate just how critical it is to have as many observers as possible collecting that information. Next slide, please. Okay, and then I tell them, set up what you have. You know, take an inventory of the equipment that you have. Seek the very best time resolution that you can achieve with what you've got. And we talk about WWV, and we talk about tape recorders, or maybe tape recording WWV and an AM radio station playing someplace, because you know you can tape that, you can record that AM radio station playing during your event. And I talk to them about the importance of planning, thinking about what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, and what to expect. And I tell them the head-to-tail ratio on an occultation has got to be at least 100 to 1. You'll put 100 more times into getting ready for the event than you will actually doing the event. The 30 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever the time duration of the event is going to be a minor part of what you're actually doing as you get ready for these events. And that if you don't think about them and make proper preparation for them, chances are you won't succeed when it's time to do the event, especially in the very beginning when you first start. I always share with people Derek Bright's rule: be on site and be ready to do the event 2 hours ahead of time. And I can tell you there have been many, many, many times that I have missed an event by 30 seconds because I got caught up in doing something and I just wasn't ready that last 30 seconds. And of course, I tell people to think about the weather and plan for the weather, but expect the weather to frustrate you because you have no control over it, and the forecast 72 hours out and beyond is just very difficult to rely on. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to show a series of cameras, and people would say, I would never do an occultation with that camera. Well, if that's the only camera you've got and you're getting ready for Regulus, trust me, you can take a camera like this and you can get ready to do such an event. Now, by the time you actually do the event, maybe you've gotten excited enough about it to upgrade your camera. But you use what you've got. Next slide, please. Little astrophotography with my little sure shot camera. Next slide, please. I think that was Venus and the moon, the two brightest things I could find in the sky. Another common DLSR camera. And the price on these things just varies greatly now. Next slide, please. And this is a shot with that camera at my northern site at Redding North Observatory, which is up near DeLand, Florida. And down up there I can see down to 5th Mag stars. So it's a very nice site. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about the cameras that are out there. I always encourage people to get the simplest camera that works well. This is the same thing. This particular one, the KPC SLL 650 Bravo Hotel, is the same as a PC-164 CEX-2. In fact, I think it's the Korean outfit that makes that camera for the company in the States that sells it. Next slide, please. I love to show Scotty sitting there wrapped up doing his first occultation with all of his equipment, and then what he ultimately went from to what he has gone to, because it sort of reinforces the image of seeing my 70 millimeter scope on a small tripod sitting on the stage when I'm doing one of these presentations. Next slide, please. And then I show the 10th magnitude stars Scotty caught when he sent this image around the world, and how excited people got at being able to see that deep. And I talk a little bit about the date timestamp, but I don't want to scare people away with that. And then I talk a little bit about this camera, which is a magical camera, smart camera, brilliant camera, things going on inside that camera that are unknown, but I'll dwell on that in a little bit. Next slide, please. And this is the way I typically set mine up for Reading South Observatory, 70 millimeter. I have 4 of these 70 millimeter occultation scopes, and I normally use the PC-164 CEX-2 with it, but more and more I find myself wanting to do fainter objects because there are just more of those events. And so I keep being driven towards using the 165. With the with this setup and the PC-164 CEX-2 in West Palm Beach, I can get down to about 9th magnitude. With my 70 millimeter scope in my observatory, I often can't get much beyond 6 or 7 magnitude because of the signal to noise ratio of the light dome washing things out. Next slide, please. Now this is what you can do with that scope at a dark site, and this is during the Brixia event, and you can see, pardon me, let me back up. This is a comparison screenshot that I did from West Palm Beach, and this shows what you can do with that camera, and that camera was set up on a 70 millimeter scope under the best skies I've had in a long, long time, and you can see that it's seeing with a small aperture telescope beyond 12th magnitude, which is quite surprising. And the reason it does it, I believe, is because of that 3D NR, which is digital noise reduction, that is occurring somewhere in the processing of that camera, and that sense up model that basically focuses on the signal to noise ratio of what's being presented to the lens, what's being presented to the chip, what's being processed and then outputted from an analog point of view. In this case, I think this is a frame rate that Tony has seen. I think that he and I determined for the first time, he showed me how to do this, that I was integrating at 8. So I was 8 frames integration at this point in time. Next slide, please. This is a camera that more and more people have been talking about from New Zealand. I went out and bought 2. I took the IR filter off of the front of one of them, and I sent that camera to Dingle in Germany for his evaluation. And it's surprising. It's a surprising camera because, one, it's less expensive, and for sidewalk star parties and outreach, it's an exceptionally good camera. It's a little bigger. It's a bigger body camera, but it's a Samsung SCB 2000. And the thing that I found that it does better than any other camera I currently own is I take beautiful images of Jupiter with that camera. It's a color camera, and it's a great planetary imaging camera. I don't know that I would use it for occultations, but I know a lot of people in New Zealand and in Australia are using it, and I've seen some people talking about it in the States. And from my point of view, I'm just trying to let people know that there are options out there and there are things that they can consider as they buy equipment. And for some who want to do planetary imaging and occultations, this may be the camera for them to buy. I talked a little bit about the ZR family of Canon camcorders. I mentioned you use a ZR40 if you want. You can use a 65 or 60 or an 80 or an 85 or a 90. And then I mentioned that currently I've been buying ZR100s because IOTA hasn't discovered them and the price hasn't been driven up, and I can actually buy a newer camcorder, ZR100, for less than I can buy a ZR90 or 85 because there's no demand for the 100s. But I'm guessing the more I talk about it, the more likely it is that I'm going to drive the demand curve up for that particular camcorder. And I talk a little bit about the importance of no compression, getting the highest quality data recording that you can. But then I mentioned some people are using these mobile mini DVRs as a recording device, and they work quite well for straightforward occultations. But there's a loss because of the compression that's involved in it. But they do output in an AVI format that can be read by Tangle or Tigris, so that it is possible to use this and actually simplify your data processing steps in order to get to a photometric light curve. Next slide, please. That was my first setup, and I have to tell you, it was terrible. I got to within 10 seconds of the event as it crossed zenith, and then my telescope did a flip and drug everything off of the tables around it and scattered it on the ground, and I literally got no data at all. But I was learning. Next slide, please. Here's my next setup. You notice that I've greatly reduced the amount of clutter around me, and I was getting set up for an event that was not going to happen at zenith. The biggest reduction in equipment was I lost the fan that I had and the 150-foot power cord, extension cord that ran out. I ran the whole thing off of battery power, and it worked quite well. Next slide, please. And this is my early steps towards having a small setup, and this is before I got involved directly with IOTA. And I was using these backpack telescopes from Meade. I was finding them for about $260, and they have a flip mirror in them that allows you to have a camera setup and an eyepiece setup. And they, once you set them up and get them polar aligned, they're go-to. So they're very nice to use, and I found that very comforting to be able to hit the control pad and go to the star and then star step to my target star and know that I was, with confidence, that I was on my star field. But I'm basically telling the audience you can use what you have. You have a small telescope with a go-to mount, even one of the less expensive ones, certainly can be used for doing occultations. Next slide, please. Reading south, this is what I use in the backyard all the time. Underneath is a 70 millimeter scope. On top is an 80 millimeter scope. My finder is a 60 millimeter scope, and it's a 14-inch scope as my primary instrument. And I dearly love my pod. I wish the inventor and manufacturer of pod here in Canada was in the audience right now. Wayne's a great guy. But I have probably increased my satisfaction with astronomy 10,000%. Because I can go out, roll the dome back, do what I want to do. If it starts to rain, close the dome, wait it out, open it back up. And I've got 6 kids. I've got 13 grandkids. When they come to visit, I can go out there and close the door, turn the air conditioner on. I've got an office that's quiet, that's mine, that nobody visits. and I can continue to do some work. So it's a wonderful place to spend time. In it, I have a heater, helps in the winter, and it's also an air conditioner. So it extends the use of that pod during the day. Okay, this is my 4-panel digital video recorder that I use. Everything that goes through Reading South Observatory goes through a digital video recorder. I have 4 signal paths. So I have in the upper left is the 14-inch, in the upper right is the 80 millimeter. In the lower left is the 70 millimeter, typically with a PC-164 CEX-2 camera. And one of the reasons I put this in here is to show that the PC-164 CEX-2 gets washed out by the light dome over West Palm Beach. If you go to the next slide, I think it's going to show you that, that image again that shows the okay, this is what the 14-inch sees with a Watt 120N plus, looking into Sagittarius, if I get that right. And then this is what the 80 millimeter sees without a focal reducer, looking into the same area. So I've got a focal reducer on the 14-inch to give me a wider field of view, no focal reducer on the 80 millimeter, giving me a similar field of view. And I'm seeing to a comparable depth with a telescope that cost me $250. And that Watt 165 DNR doing whatever magic it does on board for signal to noise reduction is competing favorably with what I see with that 14-inch scope under the light dome. And it's because of the light dome that this starts to work so well for me. Next slide, please. And then that's that same slide again that gives you the magnitude limits associated with that 80 millimeter scope with that particular camera. The whole idea is to tell the audience you don't have to have a 14-inch scope to see very deep and to have more than 1 million stars available to you for doing occultations. The whole idea is to get them excited enough about it to make an effort. And because I tell them they don't have to go mobile, they can do it from their front yard or backyard by taking this approach, seeing deeper with less. Hopefully, I'm building a population of observers in South Florida that will engage in these kinds of events. Next slide, please. My first setup for my very first successful occultation, that's on an Ioptron mini cube, which is the same thing I used for the annular event with Tony George and Steve Preston and Ernie and I think Butch Fleming was with me from Redding, California. Next slide. And this is what Richard Nugent sent me as an example of what he likes to set up and use. Next slide. I talk a little bit about how to go through the planning model and what to set up to do on occultation observations, how it's done. Next slide. Talk a little bit about what you will see if you do an occultation, and I use Steve Kennard's image of the occultation with the satellite. And that allows me to make the point again that we never have enough observers looking at these events, because a critical event like a satellite is unconfirmed because there wasn't anyone else to say, yes, I saw it too, from a different site. Again, hammering home the point that we need more observers. Next slide, please. And then I walk through the Guide 8 charts. Next slide. Some of the planning tools that are available to us. These are Finder charts. Next slide. Comment that you can buy this software. They'll send you the CD, but then they invite you to share it with everybody. Not everybody has to buy it. Somebody has to get the CD, but after that, you can redistribute it. Talk a little bit about Occult Watcher and how it coordinates and integrates a lot of information in one place at your fingertips on a PC. Next slide. That's another Occult Watcher tool product that comes in terms of the sort. And then this didn't come out very well through the presentation system, but that's just the disclaimer slide poster that you put up next to your telescope to say, please not disturb scientific work being done. I'm in the area. Please call me. My name is. And I encourage anyone who sets out a remote site to do that, to coordinate with the local property owners. If you're going to a town where you're not known and you're going a day or two early, let the local sheriff know that you're going to be there so that he doesn't get excited when he sees you out there in the middle of the dark pointing things, which he doesn't understand. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk them through the planning process one last time in terms of how you would go about doing this, and hopefully they're starting to think about it. It's starting to make sense to them, even if they've never thought about it before. And so now walking through this planning model again is somewhat helpful. Next slide, please. Some of the tools that we used in the process again. Making the point that you always file a report. Even if you have a miss, if you observed and had weather to support what you were doing and are reasonably sure that you were on that star, that you observed a miss, please file the report, and then I provide the reference links, which are pretty common today. Any questions? Okay, I see Brad, I was referring to John. He's talking about something else. Mixed chats. Tony, what are the integrating rates? Oh, that was a question that we've already asked. Any other questions? Yes.
What's the loss? So if my DVR is accurately time-stamped and I've got a disappearance and a reappearance and the timestamp is accurate, what am I losing with the DVR?
Compression in two forms. There's compression, that H.264 compression, which a lot of them, but not all of them use. Some of them use more aggressive compression schemes.
By compression, we mean literally they half it out, so you may, instead of getting 60 frames, you may only be getting 30.
There's two forms of compression, right. There's this idea that they will actually use the standard H.264 compression, which compresses both spatially and in time. Right. And then some of these devices I've seen actually throw out fields along the way. They'll keep only 2 out of 5 fields or something like that in order to reduce their data rates. So they're, so there's just a couple different forms of compression, and it varies a lot. There isn't really what I would consider in these DVRs. There's no standard. People use all sorts of tricks in order to cram as much recording time as possible into these devices. Into whatever memory space they have on the little device, and especially the ones that come out of China, which are kind of hard to figure out. So it's there's two issues. One is we know they're using compression, and they're using significant compression compared to what we've seen in DV. And the other is some of these are using even other random tricks. So you can still get data. It's just you're going to lose your, if you will, lose signal noise, lose time resolution. So it's somewhat compromised. So it's probably better than nothing in some situations, especially if it's a longer event. But we'd rather not recommend those. We'd like to find better solutions.
Yeah, and that's the point that I make. The question had to do with what's the problem with DVRs, what's the problem, why are you concerned about it? When I do my presentations, I never go negative. I say the last thing I want you to do is not attempt an occultation. What I want you to do is attempt every high-ranked occultation that comes your way and use what you've got and understand what you've got. It's sort of what Tony was saying about understand your camera. Well, understand your equipment and know how deep you can see reliably, and understand what it takes to point at an obscure star that you would never consider looking at, except you know an asteroid is going to pass between you and the star. And so you want to be in a position to capture the data associated with the occultation and time it. Sure, but you always put a caveat on there, and your goal is the high precision timing and the most linear light curve you can produce so that the scientific value in the data that you collect will be as high as possible. But I don't want the visual observer to think he can't play in our sandbox. And I don't want the person who's just looking through an eyepiece to think he can't play. And I don't want the person who's only using his cell phone for timing to think that he can't play. I want all of them to understand they were fully invited to the party, and we just want them to, over time, improve their ability to do it with greater and greater precision. The idea is to capture a large audience or a large cadre of potential observers to field and look at these critical events. So I think that's the end of my presentation. Any other comments, please? I have seen videos where the background is pure black with no background noise. Where did the noise go? I think they turned the gain down until all you saw were the stars. Oh, he's talking about compression schemes, possibly. Yeah, possibly. Okay, any other questions from anyone? Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate being able to present today.